Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for showing up to the Tech Showcase today. So excited to have you here. Just a few housekeeping reminders before we get going. We do have a few chats here, so make sure to introduce yourself in the regular chat, drop your LinkedIn, connect with all the other attendees that are live here today, and then make sure to drop any questions in the Q&A section for the Quantilope team to answer. We're really excited to have the Quantilope team here, so Lindsey's gonna take it away.
All right, thank you. So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. I am very excited to talk to you all about brand health tracking. So before we start, let me introduce myself. I'm Lindsey. I'm a solutions consultant at Quantilope. In my role, I talk to a lot of different marketers and insights people, just like you, and I support them in streamlining, automating, and improving their research processes through technology. My background is in classic academic research. I started my research career over a decade ago, and back then everything was done manually. There was a lot of SPSS, painstakingly cleaning data and recoding variables. And once you had your data, you had to recreate charts one by one in PowerPoint. It took us months to analyze and report on data from our projects. My experience led me to search for alternatives, and I found Quantilope, a platform that was truly innovating how research was conducted. For those of you who may not be familiar with Quantilope, we are an AI-driven consumer intelligence platform, and our mission is to free all marketing decisions from gut feel by connecting you to the hearts and minds of your consumers. So today, I'm super excited to talk to you about the latest innovations in brand health tracking. I assume that many or even all of you are currently doing brand tracking. And from my experience, I would say that companies typically spend a lot of money on tracking. And tracking is usually considered to be a really valuable tool in the research toolkit. But it's also consistently one of the biggest sources of frustrations for brands. So when clients come to me to talk about automating their brand tracking, they often have to wait months for their tracking data. They field lengthy surveys that have grown bigger and bigger over the years, and they don't even use half of the data in there. In the end, more often than not, the tracking doesn't help them to understand where to grow or which business recommendations to make. So tracking is a really big challenge for a lot of brands. Adding to this, there is now an enormous amount of empirical research on how brands grow and the best ways we can go about tracking brand health. So, spoiler alert, most brand trackers aren't rooted in empirical research. Tracking brand awareness or brand loyalty is fine. But from my experience, these traditional metrics that have been around since the 1950s are not going to give you the answers you need to make strategic marketing decisions. So what does the research tell us? Well, the first key learning is that brand growth is a function of physical availability and mental availability. And before I get into this, I'd love to take a quick poll. So how many of you on the line are familiar with the term mental availability? You should now see a pop-up with a question. So just curious if you have come across the term before. So I'll give everyone a few seconds to answer. All right. Really interesting results. I'm seeing that quite a lot of you have never actually heard of the term mental availability. And so that is fantastic. That's absolutely what we're going to cover today. So physical availability refers to how easy your brand is to buy. For example, how extensive is your distribution network? Or do you have prominent in-store positioning? Unfortunately, if you're listening to me now, you probably don't have too much control over these things. It's likely a sales, purchasing, or operations team that can have an impact here. But it's obviously still a very important aspect for brand growth. However, where you can have enormous impact as a marketer is when it comes to mental availability. Mental availability is how easily your brand comes to mind in an actual buying situation. And in most buying situations, the brand that comes to mind is the brand that gets bought. You can think about mental availability as the real estate that your brand occupies within the mind of a buyer. And the reason this is important is because the more mental availability your brand has, the more likely it is to grow. We as marketers can have a massive impact here because advertising and marketing are what will build up the key mental structures to increase your brand's chance of being mentally available in buying situations. So how can we increase your brand's mental availability, the mental real estate in your potential buyer's mind? Well, we can start by focusing on category entry points. Category entry points are the transient thoughts that a person has as they are going about their lives, but that can trigger this consumer into becoming ready to buy a product. So what does that mean? A category entry point, or CEP, is any motivation, thought, or need that turns you from an everyday human being into a potential category buyer. For example, the other day, as I was on the way to meet a friend, I was thirsty and I wanted an on-the-go drink. And so I stopped to get some iced tea from the local corner store, just to give me a little energy on the way to meet my friend. That quick thought I had about needing a drink to take with me to meet my friend, that is a category entry point. CEPs can be needs, occasions, reasons, or motivations. They can be lots of different types of things, but what is important about them is that they are independent from your brand. For example, trust is an attribute that is often included in brand trackers, but it is brand dependent. That would not make sense without being attached to a specific brand. I don't go about my daily life, and I'm sure you don't either, thinking I need a drink I can trust. So trust is not a typical CEP. Not to say that it isn't important in terms of differentiating between more and less trustworthy brands, but this is maybe a thought that I'll have when picking a specific iced tea from the fridge or shelf, and it is not something that prompts me to buy a drink in the first place. In contrast, an on-the-go drink is a concept that is independent of any brand. It will be there for people who are moving about, thirsty, and will need to get a beverage. There would be a need for an on-the-go drink even if Gatorade, Coke, or in my case, Fuse Tea, or any other brand did not exist. These category entry points are the building blocks for mental availability. So if we can build up a network of category entry points for your brand, you will be more mentally available, which will increase your chance of being bought in specific situations. So as you think about your brand strategy, you should set a goal of broadening your brand's category entry point network. Broad, fresh mental networks will set your brand on a growth trajectory. Thinking back to me grabbing an iced tea, a peach Fuse tea specifically, while being on the go to meet my friend. A question you might have is, why didn't I grab a Gatorade instead of iced tea? So when I think about Gatorade, I generally think about Gatorade as a sports drink for athletes, something that would maybe give me energy and set me up for high performance. So it just didn't come to mind when I was thirsty and on the way to meet my friend. So what could Gatorade do then? I suppose I'm not the only one who isn't picking up this drink when I need something on the go. Well, an option could be to run an ad campaign talking about Gatorade on the go rather than focusing on sports, which may make it easier for non-athletes like me to grab a Gatorade the next time we think about an on-the-go drink. So the goal is to increase the mental availability of Gatorade when customers are thinking about the category entry point of, I need an on-the-go drink. The more extensive this network of memory associations, or CEPs, are for your brand, the greater your brand's chance of coming to mind in a moment of need. Owning CEPs are an effective marketing strategy because once it's established, it can generate returns for decades. For example, the tradition of buying a diamond engagement ring for marriage proposals was a CEP essentially manufactured by the De Beers marketing team, and it still lives on today. Thinking of category entry points can also drive growth by identifying new consumption occasions or moments where you may be able to drive incremental sales. Okay, so at this point, I hope that you're as excited as I am about CEPs, but you might wonder how we actually come up with category entry points. So let's chat about how we can identify CEPs for your category. Well, we can generally use the so-called 7Ws framework to capture the main themes of CEPs. 6 out of 7 start with a W, and it's an easy way to think about the major CEP themes. So let's think through some of these for the soda category. First, we have why. So soda could be thirst quenching, or I'm craving something sweet. When, on a hot summer day. Where, convenience store. While, taking a walk, or maybe just relaxing. With whom, with friends, or for self-indulgence. With what, maybe a sandwich or an alcoholic beverage. And then we end with how I'm feeling, maybe low energy. So here you can use previous research to come up with some of these. We can do, qualitative studies. You can look at some previous segmentation research, jobs to be done framework, or you can even run a quantitative pre-study to understand the most relevant CEPs. And that's actually what we do here at Quantilope. We use a combination of generative AI to come up with a long list of CEPs across the 7Ws. Then we do a workshop to make sure that we capture your industry expertise. And then we run an implicit pre-study to be able to categorize the top CEPs. And this step is very important as it's the foundation of your tracker. Okay, so once you have figured out your top category entry points, how can we put all of this theory into practice for your tracker? We'd suggest your overall thought process behind your brand health tracker follow the principles that I'm about to outline, which points to 3 things that many people tend to get wrong or misunderstand in their brand health trackers. So first, we think it's very important to design for the category. Create a brand tracker that's truly representative for the category as a whole and could be used by any brand in your space. It shouldn't be just about you. If another brand in the category, whether it's a bigger brand or a smaller brand, wouldn't use it, then you've got a biased measurement. We know from years of marketing science research that brands' biggest competitors are generally the bigger brands. So you want to make sure you're thinking about the category at large. And also, imagine you're a big brand, but you launch another brand in the category. Then you've got to look at it through a smaller lens, and you're going to have to design a totally new tracker, and that seems a bit counterproductive. Analyze for the buyer. The biggest difference between buyers is not their gender, age, or attitude towards life, but rather their experience with the brand. So that's the biggest thing that we need to control for, whether or not someone is a brand user. We also know from scientific research that the biggest growth potential comes from current brand non-buyers, so we want to make sure that we pay extra attention to those people. Understanding both your current buyers and non-buyers will allow you to create more sensitive measures and highlight key opportunities for growth. Lastly, we want to report for the brand. Everybody here knows brands are different. Remembering this will help you give context to better interpret your brand's results. You should take into account the size of your brand for analysis and ensure metrics are adjusted to reflect that. Let's think about what marketing scientists call the double jeopardy law. According to this law, if you're a small brand, you may notice that by default you have less users and they are slightly less loyal, which means for you it's basically twice as hard to grow compared to bigger brands. So comparing your smaller brand to a bigger brand in terms of growth potential would really be comparing apples to oranges. Now, of course, I'd love for you all to have a super concrete takeaway that you could apply right away in your tracker. So next, I'll list out a few best practices we recommend as you actually think about the content of what goes into your tracker. All right, so the first thing we want to do is define your category. This is the cue that consumers have when selecting products, and it's important to align internally since it defines the universe that your tracker will be focused on. For example, let's think about potato chips. The category could be any snack since consumers could consider pretzels or candy or chocolate, or of course it could just be other potato chips. We recommend thinking about how you internally view your category and competitors, and also where do you want to grow? And then we recommend phrasing this category cue in a way that an everyday consumer would get it. Next, we want to make sure you clearly lay out the competitors you want to measure, your brand list. As mentioned earlier, we need this to be as non-biased as possible, so the list should reflect about 70 to 80% of the total market, not just brands who you think are your competitors. It should include a mix of small, medium, and large brands. These are brands that will compete on the same category entry points. Remember, you want anyone in your category to be able to use this. And you also need to consider whether private labels are relevant. If an individual private label has a lot of market share, then it should be named. But if there isn't, then you can just put a catch-all private label response. This is something that you can check in on every few years, and market shares are a really good basis for decision making. And of course, don't forget to include your brands. Next is your target group. Your target group should be buyers of products from the category because these are the folks making a decision. Consider how frequently folks buy, ensuring you have a reflection of light, medium, and heavy category buyers. For example, a fast-moving consumer goods category like yogurt or chocolate, we'd suggest a past 3-month purchase timeframe. But for a category like sneakers, we might want to open that past purchase window to the past 1 to 2 years. So we're looking for what some researchers call a Goldilocks timeframe. Remember, we want to design for the category, and this means that we want to include people who might not have had a chance to buy a specific category product in the past 4 weeks. Sample size. You really do not need a huge sample to get statistically valid results, but what is important is to ensure you have a readable subsample of buyers versus non-buyers of your brand. So take a look at your penetration or how many people have bought your brand in a given time frame, and we should make sure that we have at least a subsample of 100 buyers of your brand. And then we also have our CEP considerations. As I mentioned before, generally people do this via existing research, qualitative or quantitative. Whatever you do, you should follow the framework of collecting a balanced list across these W questions to get a broad view of mental availability. And this is how simple and beautiful your survey could look. This is a peek of a real brand health tracking study that we've run on the soda category. Here you can see how we ask respondents to please select all brands they think fit with the different category entry points. Basically, a free choice, pick any approach. This is our key question that will give us the basis for our mental availability metrics that should be your main KPIs for your brand health tracker. So let's now talk about our KPIs. A core metric in your brand health tracking based on the category entry point survey question we just saw should be your brand's mental market share. This metric will tell you how present your brand is in consumers' minds, and it's proven to correlate highly with actual sales market share, typically between 0.75 and 0.95. So how does it actually work? Essentially, it is the proportion of consumers for whom your brand comes to mind when they think of buying the category across all entry points. Your brand's mental share is in green here across CEPs, and the y-axis is actually the proportion of consumers for whom the brand is coming to mind across the CEPs. The whole box, the total area, is actually the total mental share universe. So this will sum up to 100%. Think about how much space your brand occupies in the minds of consumers when it comes to, for example, the beverage category. So for me personally, Fused Tea will occupy a larger space than Gatorade, as I associate Fused Tea with more relevant category entry points. This leads to Fused Tea having a higher mental market share than Gatorade, at least for me. Of course, this is a simplified chart, but for your tracker, you should be able to easily track this proportion over time to look for patterns. And if you were to see consistent increases or decreases in your mental market share metric, you'd likely see a corresponding change in sales market share. And of course, the higher your mental market share, the better your mental availability. So now let's look at another way to get deeper insights from your Better Brand Health Tracker. So in her book, Better Brand Health, Jenni highlights how mental advantage accounts for two very important factors among category buyers, which are brand size and attribute commonality. So accounting for brand size ensures you don't overinflate or underestimate a certain brand attribute relationship given the brand size. And without accounting for an attribute's commonality, the less typical attributes can appear less important when that's actually not always the case. Brands need a way to account for these two factors in their strategy and ensure they have a true understanding of where to focus their attention and efforts. To do this, quantilope has automated a mental advantage analysis. A mental advantage occurs when a brand scores higher than expected on a given attribute or CEP given its brand size and how common those attributes or CEPs are to the category as a whole. So let's take a look now at the mental advantage output in the quantilope platform. In order to properly interpret mental advantages, you'll need to understand which CEPs are specifically important for the category as a whole. You can do this by reviewing the data from the implicit pre-study that we worked on. We expect more strongly associated CEPs with a higher overall implicit index score to occur more frequently for category buyers than less strongly associated CEPs. And so this means that high index CEPs are a more important lever for brand growth than lower index CEPs. These high index CEPs provide a good starting point for analysis, but the brand's mental advantages relative to competitors should also be taken into account. If 3 or more competitors already have a mental advantage on a specific CEP, it can be difficult or very costly for the focus brand to activate this CEP. So overall, we recommend different actions for each specific CEP, depending on the overall importance of the CEP for the category and the focus brand's performance relative to competitors. Now, at the end of the day, we do not only want to evolve tracking metrics and make them more actionable, but we also want to evolve the way that we do tracking. No more 35-minute questionnaires, no more manual analyses that take hours and hours, no more waiting for weeks and months until you get results. That's why we would strongly encourage you to use all of this information to create a brand health tracker that will have a clear impact for your marketing and brand. And we recommend leveraging research technology to automate your tracking. To bring this to life, I'm now going to show you what a demonstration of this tracking solution looks like in the quantilope platform. So I'm going to show you our showcase focused on the soda category, but before we delve into the project details, it's important to share that this study was built through a pre-built template. So everything you see in the dashboard and everything you receive on the survey setup has been pre-built to reduce the amount of time that you are spending on the complex logistics and more time to focus on understanding the learnings from the results. It's also important to note that what I'm showing you today is not the full picture and has been condensed to highlights, but of course, we're more than happy to share the final showcase with you. Please just leave a note in the chat. So now to take you through the showcase details. This tracking study focused on the soda category in the US, with specifically focusing on Diet Coke as our core brand and 9 key competitors, including Dr. Pepper, Pepsi, and Sprite. The study was run in quarterly increments, and we're sharing results from the first 4 waves. So let's start to dive into the data points. So here you can see our first metric, our main metric, is mental market share. And this metric reflects the key question of how present is my brand in consumers' minds. In this chart, you can clearly see that Diet Coke's mental market share is stable at 8%, which is actually fully in line with its actual market share according to Statista. This alignment indicates that Diet Coke's mental availability is at a healthy state. And now you can also see here on the left-hand side of the dashboard that this actually might not always be the case. We have certainly seen instances where the mental market share is not aligning with the actual sales market share is not aligning with the mental market share. And if that is the case, we can start to diagnose why that might be occurring. So in the next section, we can see what CEPs are most strongly associated with Diet Coke by hovering over the data points for our specific brand. And so this is an example of our live significance testing, which is built into our dashboards. And so really easily, I can see that restaurant, barbecue, and family gatherings, those social CEPs, are really strongly associated with the brand Diet Coke. If I move on to our mental advantage analyses, we can see that Diet Coke is performing better than expected for its size on the CEP restaurant and takeout. And these associations should be defended because they are important to the category as a whole. So Diet Coke should also consider broadening its CEP network by focusing on CEPs for which no brand owns, or those white spaces that you see across the mental advantages chart, like lunch or enjoyment. So there is so much more information in this dashboard than we have time to share here, but I will also mention that we focus the entire dashboard on your brand and break out those 4 main KPIs split by buyers versus non-buyers, which again is important to monitor over time to see if you are increasing your mental market share among the non-buyers and therefore converting those long-tail non-buyers into more buying situations. So not covered here, but we also evaluate brand attitudes and monitor positive and negative sentiments over time to start to understand the opinions of each brand. And there we have it, a snapshot into our insights dashboard. And I'm going to switch back into the deck and wrap it up. So we recommend using a brand health tracker that has been developed and based on empirical data of brand growth, allowing you to measure and understand both the buyer and non-buyer experiences of each brand. Leverage mental availability and CEPs to truly understand how to improve your brand's connection to these needs, motivations, and occasions so that you can drive brand growth and deliver actionable insights. And ensure that you always have access to the metrics that matter when you need them, which will lead to actionable outcomes for your business with clear recommendations without having to do any manual analyses ever again. All right, not sure if we have too much time for questions. Sorry about that. A lot of information to cover today.
It is all good. I think we do actually have some questions that came in the chat, so just wanted to make sure that we cover those. It looks like we have a question asking how, and you might have covered this already, how mental AV correlates with purchase intent. And by AV, I'm assuming average, or sorry.
I mean, I don't know if we've done that analysis, but I do know that the CEPs as a whole correlate to actual market share. So you should be able to feel confident in the decisions that you're making based on the mental advantage chart, because those CEPs and leveraging those CEPs actually will correlate to market share. So if you're seeing, decreases in important CEPs or advantages, those should be defended or maintained depending on the importance of those CEPs to the category.
Okay, perfect. And then if you just wanted to touch on how mental availability is different from brand awareness.
Yeah. So brand awareness solely relies on one category cue, which is what soda brands do you know? So with mental availability, we're providing respondents with more cues, namely up to 20 different category entry points. And this makes our mental availability measure more holistic, and consequently KPIs like mental market share show a much higher correlation with sales market share than your average unaided or aided brand awareness questions.
Perfect. And thank you so much, Lindsey, for the presentation. As Lindsey mentioned, we are a little bit tight on time. Please make sure to reach out to the quantilope team if you have any additional questions. I've gone ahead and dropped their LinkedIn right there. So make sure to click that link and then follow them on LinkedIn. Thank you again, Lindsey. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.